What's up, you guys, and welcome back to the Kingdom Culture podcast. This week, we are getting back into episode 2 of a series that we are in on Gen Z and digital culture. As a quick recap of last week, we kind of talked about Gen Z and digital culture, what that looks like, how Gen Z is using things like social media, and how those can be either a tool to help or something that pulls us away from our faith. So looking at how to use those things practically. And something that we touched on last week that we're going to get a little more in depth on this week is that Gen Z has never had more opportunity for connection and opportunity to meet and build community than now through social media and this digital age. Yet, our generation has never felt more alone. It is one of the loneliest generations out there. And so on social media, in this digital culture that we're part of, we follow people every single day. We listen to their podcasts. We watch their stories. We know their opinions, the trauma that they share, their routines, even sometimes things like their coffee order, things that people are putting out online. But yet, many of us are still lacking and looking for community. And something that we're kind of talking about today is the parasocial side of social media, parasocial relationships, what they are, why they feel real, and why they can't replace actual community. And more importantly, how Gen Z can build real, embodied, Jesus-centered community in this digital age. And so, in case you don't know, a relationship that many people will use the word parasocial to describe is when you feel close to someone, you feel understood by them, you feel emotionally invested in them, but they don't actually know you. And this can happen a lot of times with things like influencers or content creators or streamers or podcasters or celebrities and even pastors or Christian voices online. This will happen a lot of times when somebody, like when a celebrity goes through a breakup and people will be all invested in the business. And a lot of time people will be like, this is very parasocial, right? And so something about parasocial relationships, though, is that they're actually designed into digital platforms. Because the problem isn't necessarily the content that we consume, but the problem is when consumption has been made to replace connection. And so often on social media, you will see people operating in these almost parasocial relationships where they are obsessing over or deeply invested in someone who probably doesn't even know that they exist. And these relationships feel real for a couple of reasons. One of them is that a lot of times they feel safe because there's really no risk of rejection. There's not really any awkwardness because you're behind a screen, and there's not any vulnerability required, at least from one side. Another is that often they feel pretty intimate. We hear people talk about on social media their deepest thoughts, their trauma, their struggles, but when you have intimacy without it being mutual, it isn't really intimacy, it's just exposure to one side. Another thing is that they feel efficient. You get the idea or the feeling of community without any sort of inconvenience. You feel like you have a place to belong, but you really have no responsibility in the relationship. You feel like there is some sort of connection to you and this other person, but there's really no commitment required. And this can be dangerous because you are constantly on the receiving end, but there is nothing being required of you. And I think that has really taught our generation something that is kind of detrimental to our relationships. There's someone who posted a video that I saw and they said, everybody wants to be a village, but no one wants to be a villager. No one wants to inconvenience themselves for their friends. No one wants to do things when it's difficult. No one wants to have hard conversations. And I think that social media has contributed to this, because it has made us feel that a relationship is just something where we gain from the other person, like when you're following someone online. And that's not true. The reality is a committed relationship or any friendship is something where both people are giving and being sacrificial, and it takes commitment from both sides. And so the tension here is that what feels easier for us, which we typically do, is the thing that forms us less. Because these sort of parasocial relationships can inform you, and they can inspire you, and they can even entertain you if this is someone that you're watching online. But what they cannot do is everything else. They don't know you. They can't correct you. They can't pray with you or carry you. They can't sit in silence with you or hold you accountable. And they cannot walk with you through real life suffering. And the Bible tells us that two are better than one. This is in Ecclesiastes 4. And that if one falls, then the other can help them up. And you can't be helped up if there's not someone who even knows that you fell. You can't have commitment and what is described in Christian brotherhood or sisterhood. You're not going to receive these things from someone who you don't have a real Christian community with. Being part of digital culture, having digital connections can supplement community, but it can never substitute it. And so something that we see in Jesus' life is that Jesus could have reached the world only through crowds and platforms and having mass followings, but he chose intimacy, which I think is important. He chose to have his 12 disciples. He chose to talk with people over shared meals, over long walks. Sometimes I'm sure this looked like awkward conversations, sometimes conflict, accountability, and proximity. He wasn't just discipling people from a distance. He was also doing life with people. And this isn't to say that everyone has to be your best friend all the time, but it also means that digital culture cannot replace the community that we find, the fellowship that we find described in Scripture. Christianity has always been embodied and done in community, and faith was never meant to be lived alone or just something that we take part in online. And so as Gen Z, how can we build real community? What are some practical steps? One thing that we can do that I think would shift for so many Gen Z people, if they would do this, is actively move from being an audience to being a participant. So stop asking, who should I follow? And rather start looking to be part of something. I think so many people who are part of our generation solely look for, what pastor should I follow? What church should I watch their sermon from this week? What podcast should I listen to? Rather than finding a church to be part of, rather than finding a spiritual leader to be a mentor to you, rather than getting into the word for yourself. We're constantly looking for someone to cater to us and to bring us, the word to us, bring us whatever it is that we're looking for, rather than digging in and finding it for ourselves. And so stop looking to just be an audience all the time and to just have things catered to you, but rather to be a participant, be part of the body, be in the word on your own, doing these things actively, not just looking for them to be spoon-fed to you every single week. Another thing is to look for depth. Don't just look for a scale. Some people will just look for a Christian creator with the most followers and follow that person and decide that that's where they're going to get their biblical accountability from. You don't have to have 50 friends or a huge circle or constant social interaction. You need people who know your real life, who have seen your patterns, who love you enough to tell you the truth and walk with you in those things. Those are the things that help you to grow, not just to see someone online who is giving you 15-second videos about your faith, but doesn't actually know you in real life and isn't helping you to grow. And so another thing we can do is to let the things that we see online lead us to offline obedience. If there's something online that convicts you or it encourages you or it challenges you, ask yourself, how can I talk about this in real life? How can I apply this to my real life? Because, social media and digital tools can be impactful in Christian spaces when they are applied, right? But if I'm just constantly saving and reposting and liking Christian videos, but I don't actually apply anything that I'm hearing to my real life, then nothing's going to change. And so take these things that you're hearing, this wisdom that you're hearing, and not only apply it to your life, but build conversations around it. Find people to talk with about this. And the next thing is just be willing to be a little bit inconvenient. We kind of touched on this earlier, but having a real community requires your time, some awkwardness, sometimes conflict. It requires forgiveness. It requires showing up when it's not always what you want to do. But that's where formation happens in your life, because church is people who are being present, who are sharing life, who have mutual submission to God, and they're building a spiritual family. So church is not always the most aesthetic thing. Church is not always going to feel like, the 15-second hype sermon reels you see on social media, but it is going to deepen your faith. It's going to sharpen you, and it's going to help you build community. And so I want to say all of this to say that all of this begins with us starting the conversation to build community. Because I don't say any of this to make someone feel, ostracized if maybe you haven't had that community, maybe you have been lost and you haven't known what to do. You have to start somewhere. Everyone has to start somewhere. And so if this challenges you in some way and you feel like, I have not been building community in real life. I've been using social media and using digital platforms to grow my faith. I don't have any in-person community. I want to challenge you to take some next steps to really build this for yourself, because when Jesus was walking with his disciples, and when you look at the history of the church, people didn't always have social media. This was not the main thing that people were using to grow their faith. It's a supplement, but like we said, it's not a substitute. And the things that people have done for history, for the history of Christianity, the time that people have spent in community, the time they've spent sharpening each other and holding them accountable, these things are still needed now. And so how can you supplement, how can you use social media but not substitute the things that are absolutely necessary to build community and to deepen your faith? And so if this challenged you in some way, start looking at practical next steps of how you can deepen your community and your surroundings and the people that you are around to help you build a faith and a relationship that is not just parasocial, but to build community in real life and Christian community at that. So maybe that looks like texting someone, just reaching out, asking if they'd like to get together and recap your sermon notes you took. Invite someone to coffee. This is one of the number one ways that you can build community. Anytime I meet a young woman and she wants to be friends, or we want to look at the word together, or we're looking to grow, or we want to hold each other accountable, the number one thing I guarantee I'm going to do is ask if they want to go get coffee, because God can give you some really dynamic conversations when you're in community, even when it's something small. Show up to community. Don't just be someone who is always expecting it to be about you. Maybe people can't come to your house. Maybe people can't always go get coffee. But if your church is having a young adults event or a student event, or your church is having a midweek service or a weekend service, go be part of it. Show up to be part of community, and maybe stay for 30 minutes after and talk about the message. Do things and show up to things that give you the opportunity to build community, that are not just online platforms. And put yourself out there. Look for ways to connect with people who are Christ-minded, God-fearing people who you can surround yourself with to actually build community in real life, in person, creating fellowship for yourself, just like we see modeled by the people in the early church. Because this is how we continue to follow the culture of the kingdom, is by walking in the ways of God that were set out in Scripture, and understanding that our faith was never something that was meant for us to live alone, but rather something that was meant for us to live in community with others, in proximity to others, growing deeper with each other as we continue to follow God. So I hope that this episode challenged you and also gave you a little bit of insight as to how to build that community, not to do this alone. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you would like to stay connected for next week's episode, make sure that you turn on post reminders or post notifications. Make sure that you're following this channel and the Renew Network on Instagram to make sure that you are tuned in for next week's episode and all future episodes of not just Kingdom Culture, but every podcast, resource, and book that is shared by the Renew Network. It's going to be incredible. Thank you guys for tuning in, and until next week, be blessed.